Every year from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, the world marks the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year marks 30 years since the iconic Beijing conference, where women around the world came together to fight for their liberation, dignity, and safety. Here at Legally Clueless, we've teamed up with UN Women to spotlight African changemakers from across the continent and across generations who are doing their part to end gender-based and sexual violence. In this episode, we'll meet Josina Machel, a changemaker, survivor, and leader of an organization working to end sexual violence in Southern Africa.
My name is Josina Machel. I am a survivor of violence. I am an advocate for human rights, but particularly women's rights. I'm a founder of Kuhluka movement, which is a non-profit organization that focuses primarily on advocating for the rights and the needs of survivors, victims and survivors of violence. In general, I work in social entrepreneurship area, and I sit on a number of boards, hoping that that brings the necessary change and transformation in the lives of women. I was born in a family of people, from parents that had dedicated their lives to the well-being, to the independence of Mozambique and the peoples of Africa. And I thought there was their battle. Sometime after my father was assassinated, my mother, who's a humanitarian and a woman's force on her own right, married then my stepfather. And I always looked at life and my contribution as something quite small, as a researcher, promoting issues around HIV and so on. Little did I know that the universe had a cause of its own that I would embrace. In 2015, October 2015, I was in a car with my then partner, and we disagreed on a particular issue, and all of a sudden he stops the car and he starts beating me. He beat me so severely that I lost my right eye right there and then, and with complete impossibility of recovering because the damage was so severe. But what led me to stand here and to raise my voice and to speak up wasn't actually the abuse itself, which in itself is a crime, which in itself is against women's and human rights. But what led me to that was the experience that I went through. So you would imagine, or anyone would think, that being the daughter of Samara Machel, of Graça Machel, being the stepdaughter of Nelson Mandela, I would have had a smooth journey into reporting, into getting the case into the criminal justice system, and ultimately getting justice. My abuser took me, for example, to a public hospital. And in the public hospital, I got very little attention of what was necessary. Eventually, while I was in the hospital for 4.5 hours and asking for assistance and so on, I then reported, because the doctors called the police as well when I told them that I'd been abused, I had been beaten up. So I reported to the police. The first 2 weeks after that, we were focused on trying to recover the eyesight and operating and so on. So when I come back to Mozambique, I decide to reach the criminal justice system and actually start a process against my abuser. So that's where this journey starts, because I then realized that all my documentation had disappeared in the hospital. There was no evidence that Josina had been in a hospital for 4 hours. We also went to the police, and there was no evidence that I had reported to a policeman at that time. Worse than that, when I had to go up and down many times. In total, I must have visited that hospital 8 times trying to get a simple report about having been there. And they kept on saying, no, we have nothing. Eventually, they gave me a paper and said, oh, she was here and she was agitated. And I said, no. You need to write why I was agitated, or perhaps give a better description of what it is. I was bleeding, perhaps tell me where I was bleeding, and so on and so forth. But that process took weeks. Engaging with the police and getting a document as well took weeks, but it meant at certain points that I had to go to the hospital twice, because they would say, come tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And then when I'm there at 9, they say, no, it's not done, come at 3. So I would have to go back. That clicked for me and opened a completely different door or way of looking at life, because I said, if I have the ability and I have the support to be doing this and to go up and down day in and day out, and it's still difficult, then what happens to the millions of women in this country, in this continent, that actually don't have that ability? How do you get into public transport, drive 30 minutes or more to go to the hospital, get refused or not get assistance there, and told to come back 6 hours later or the following day? How many women can do that? And we have to think that it's 3 institutions that you engage in this process. It's perhaps the police, it's the medical fraternity, and it's the criminal justice system. How many employees will allow a woman to time and time again say, sorry, I have to go, I can't be in at this time because I have to go to the police, or I have to go to the courts because of my documents? And I thought to myself, something needs to be done. Something needs to change. The narrative has to change. There has to be a lot more consciousness about the issue of gender-based violence, awareness of the costs to the human being, to the person that is abused, to the family, to the support unit, to the workplace, and so on, and eventually to society. I started my legal process. I took my abuser to court immediately in 2015. I only had managed to get my day in court in 2017, because it was, documents, they were disappearing, unreasonable demands that were put on me and on the team to get there, and to frustrate the process. So 2 years later, my abuser was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months. The abuser appealed. And in 2020, the appeal court gave a reason to my abuser, so I lost the case. The sentence was reversed on the basis that I had been abused and there were no witnesses. So there was no one to come as a witness, which is a bit strange, because the very definition of gender-based violence and violence against women is that it happens in private spaces. So how they got to that sentence, I don't know. And the second issue was also what had been disputed, of whether I'd lost my eye really because of a fist, or I had fallen, as he had spoken, I had fallen and tripped and something poked my eye. So they gave credence to the second one. And so I appealed at that time to the Supreme Court, and I am still waiting for the verdict of that. So has justice been done? Not yet. But as I said, it is a demonstration of how our societies deal with the issue of gender-based violence. What happened to me is the reality of millions of women in this continent and in the world. Women who, of course, are within systems of patriarchy, systems that do not value the lives of women, systems that do not allow women to see or to feel justice. And that is when I spoke to a number of people that I know dedicated to these kind of causes or other causes, and then we created the Kuhluka movement. The Kuhluka movement is therefore a non-profit organization that focuses on the rights, advocating for the rights and the needs of women who have been abused. And we do we work on the continuum from the moment you've been abused, hopefully to 2 years or so on, when you probably would have gone through some kind of healing, some kind of regeneration. And that's what Kuhluka means. It's rebirth. It is a description of a natural phenomenon, like when there are floods or when there's a huge fire and the earth looks absolutely scorched. And you look and you say, nothing can come out of this. But years later, after some rain, after some sun, you start seeing small sprouts of green coming out. And we then equated that to the process that takes a woman after she's abused to a time when she is reborn, when she's regenerated, and she comes back to life and says, I still am. In terms of our work, we need to learn, particularly as Africans, but then with the world, we need to learn to exchange experiences, know what is being done in different countries, learn from their lessons, and adapt and see what we can do. Today, I am very glad to be at the Kenyan Women's and Children's Wellness Center to actually visit an institution that shelters women, that gives that safe space for them to heal and to regenerate. And the idea is really to look around, learn how it can be done so that we can expand to different parts of our continent. And with our work, we can infuse other organizations also with this kind of energy, with this expertise, so that we continue to service the million of women that actually need our work.
Here we look at probably giving survivors a safe place that has the whole dignity aspect to it.
Absolutely.
And we also look at just giving all the comprehensive services on top of the shelter. What else can we do for a survivor, for them to be able to heal and go back to the community?
Okay.
Yeah, so we are honored to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We get referrals from all over the country.
Oh,
yes. So
okay.
we don't just take survivors from Nairobi.
Oh, okay.
We also take survivors from anywhere else. We get refugees coming in as well.
All right.
So we also get survivors from different countries as well.
Oh,
yeah, in
okay.
East Africa mostly.
All right. Are these like a normal standard room?
This is a standard room.
Okay. Oh, wow.
For the dignity.
Very dignified.
Self-care.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Very
They
nice.
have their own bathroom as well.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
can
a
see
shared
that's so...
closet for them. It's different, isn't it?
It is absolutely different from what I've seen.
So this is a medical clinic. So the ones that need medical care, they come in here, they get seen through this clinic.
Okay.
And then we also have a counseling room.
Is this funded, the assistance for the survivors, or they have to contribute something when they come?
You're not supposed to charge a survivor, especially GBV survivors, and most especially sexual violence survivors. It's illegal. So any services offered to the survivors are essentially free.
Okay.
But we do hope, our plan is to open it up to the community and offer medical services, not just to the survivors, but the community.
Simple,
that is at a subsidized rate.
Okay.
Yeah, so probably a small fee just to help run the operations, because we do a lot of fundraising to,
institutions like this.
So just a small fee, like a subsidized rate, so we can help, we can support the community around.
It's changed my whole perspective on what actually a shelter could look like, because it's something that I advocate as imperative in the process of healing a woman and being able to move from the abusive post-abuse. I believe that we need to have centers where women can get your services and be able to face the world differently. So really honored to
Thank you for coming.
16 days of activism this year, 30 years past Beijing. Everyone is reflecting.
Yeah.
Whether you were 5 years old, like myself, and as we grew older, you would hear the older women say Beijing, or even use it as a term to
Yes.
as a marker of like freedom, agitating for change. So I'm just wondering, like, what was it like for you at that time? Where were you?
At that particular time, I think I was in high school in Swaziland. And, quite encapsulated. But then when I came out, and I got immediately into university and some kind of activism and women's issues and so on, it was definitely a mark. It was like, where were you when this happened? Where were you when women met specifically at a point to discuss women's issues? We need to remember that, particularly in Africa, right? It had come out of, there had been other meetings with the AU and so on and so forth. But there was a global one that called for action about recognizing the role of women, the issues of women. We were too young to experience, but now looking back and say, okay, that was where these women, where these issues were identified. I mean, there were issues from education to business to human rights to everything that was women's agency, exactly. And I think it was the beginning of revolution. In fact, it was the women's revolution. The point now is for us to know that we are the agenda. It's not even to say we need to be in the center of agendas. Women are the agenda. They are determinant to the agenda, because leaving women behind is really sabotaging the development of countries, of regions, of continents, and of the world. There's absolutely been progress. Those women, what we should look and say, the heroes, that at that phase were able to congregate and come out with such powerful declarations, but also ensure that when they went back to their countries, they were able to transform, to bring about change. Look, we need to agree that access to education has increased. Access to health, perhaps not as much as we would say, but when we look at entrepreneurship, women in business, women in engineering, there's been, and even the role of women in political spaces, it is there. It still needs to change, but that comes as a result of what happened in the 30 years. If we look particularly in the area of women's abuse, most countries have some kind of legislation, some very defective, it's just really paper, but there are others that have proper legislation around gender-based violence. The issue is that we haven't been able to transform that into actual implementation. That's the challenge. That's what we need to, as communities and as societies, is to rally ourselves all around so that there is implementation of it. There is training of police to be able to handle and to know how to deal with victims and survivors, to know how to do the reporting better. Because if it's not reported correctly at the police station, then what are we expecting when it gets to court? So for me, the challenge is what we do next. But absolutely recognizing, just the fact that I'm sitting here and I'm talking about from a perspective of a victim and survivor. A few years ago, it was still a hush. Yes, there was. Of course, there was abuse, but it was still very much taken care in private spaces. No, now we walk around, we speak about it, we are educating our children, but we need to look at solidarity. We need to ensure that all of us make our governments actually accountable and take responsibility over what happens to half of the population in most of the countries, right? And of course, is demystifying the whole issue and dealing with masculinity, and not dealing with our men, our uncles, and our children as the other. When I started as an activist, I absolutely looked and was like, the bad guys. No. Unfortunately, they're part of us. We raise them. They are our brothers. And so we need to make sure that we engage communities in its totality so that there is change. And I normally say, well, you know what? Many people say, oh no, this is not my problem. This doesn't touch me. Well, unfortunately, it's a ripple effect. If it's not directly, it will affect you indirectly. And if you don't take action, you run the risk of finding yourself in one of the positions. Because yes, when it comes to gender-based violence, there are those that abuse and there are those that are abused. There is a third leg of those that say, well, I'm in the middle of I'm in the fence. I don't actually have to take position. Well, in my way of being, in my way of looking at things, if you're on the fence, you're on the side of the perpetrator because you're not stopping it. And so we need to look at us and say, this is perhaps an issue that we all have to look as Africans in particular, in the world, and say, well, we need to look at GBV as perhaps the new frontier of humanity. We need to stop this war, and we need to actively take a position on where we stand in this war against women.